Hello, and welcome to this week's sermon. This sermon is for the 22nd of September 2024. That will be the 25th in Ordinary Time, Year B. Two readings today, James chapter 3, verses 13 to chapter 4, verse 3, and then verses 7 and 8, and Mark's Gospel chapter 9, verses 30 to 37. I think Jesus already had a pretty good idea what they had been quarrelling about on the road that day. The disciples had been petulantly arguing who should be second in command to Jesus in the new kingdom. Had they had the courage to ask Jesus what he was talking about when he said he was going to be betrayed and killed, they might not have been so keen on the job. But ordinary human ambition had blinded them. They might one day get more than they bargained for. So Jesus tries to explain what leadership means in his kingdom. Jesus takes a child and says, "You receive me in the same way as you receive a child." That is not as easy a lesson as we might imagine. We must be careful not to assume the way our culture today would treat a small child is the same way as society in Jesus' day. So, what was the message that the disciples heard from this teaching? Well, children in Jesus' society were at the very bottom of the social order. That is the most important aspect of this message. A child's innocence, vulnerability, and right to due care are concerns not wholly unknown to any society, but these concerns are chiefly those of our modern world. We do not have to go far back in our own history when children were treated very differently than they are today. Children down coal mines and up chimneys and in noisy, dangerous factories come to mind, and that's not that far back in our history. In Jesus' society, children were the social equivalent of a slave until they reached puberty. Children had no say in family decisions. They were entirely at the disposal of their father. Boys might be pampered rather more than girls by their mother because of their future status and the mother's future dependence upon her sons if she was ever widowed. But until a boy was propelled into the world of men upon reaching puberty, even he had little social standing and minimal power. This is the image Jesus has of his future ambassadors. Is this really what the disciples want? Are they really prepared to make themselves the very last if they want to be the first in his kingdom? Is their ambition such that they can mould it to fit the social profile of a child? Turning to James, James may appear to be condemning all ambition. But is he not rather decrying selfish ambition? James 3, verse 14. I presume there is ambition that is not necessarily selfish. Although all ambition walks a fine line between what is a healthy motivation and what is envy for another person's authority. The danger with ambition is that it is inevitably about me. It is intrinsically selfish to a degree, as it pushes us to seek the most effective position from which we can make our contribution. But a total lack of ambition is equally harmful. Without any ambition, workers can become dull, unmotivated, and lacking in drive and ingenuity. Many of us will know how frustrating it is to work for a boss who is no longer interested, who is biding time waiting for retirement, or a boss who ducks all difficult decisions and leaves them to subordinates to shoulder. Weak leadership, through a total lack of ambition is as harmful to an organisation as a selfish bullying style of leadership. And that's true for the church too. The church needs people who are ambitious for the kingdom, ambitious for Christ, and are highly motivated people who will push themselves hard, but who are not in it for their own selfish desire for power and status. As you will no doubt be aware, the church hasn't always been entirely successful in its search for such leaders. Yet I would venture that the style of leadership required varies with the times and circumstances. That's the true essence of good leadership in my book. We too readily espouse the Sunday school image of Jesus' style of leadership as being gentle Jesus, meek and mild. We forget too readily that he also excoriated the Pharisees from time to time, saying on one occasion, "Woe to you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean." Matthew 23:27. St. Paul exploded one day against those being persuaded back into the Jewish law camp. "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" Galatians 3 verse 1. And although we Methodists like to boast about sharing power between clergy and lay people, and often repeat the mantra of the priesthood of all believers, or here in New Zealand, every member a minister, we too overlook John Wesley's outburst after the 1766 conference had debated whether he held too much power. He said, "I myself sent for these conference members of my own free choice, and I sent for them to advise, not govern me." So now we've been told. Yet there were other times, of course, when a distinctly different style of leadership came to the fore. Jesus, for example, also spoke gently to the crowds. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." St. Paul said, "For what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake." 2 Corinthians 4 verse 5. And Wesley, when in a more conciliatory frame of mind, wrote, "Give me your hand. I do not mean be of my opinion. You need not. I do not expect it or desire it. Neither do I mean that I will be of your opinion. I cannot. You need not endeavour to come over to me or bring me to you. Let all these smaller points stand aside. If your heart is as my heart, if you love God and all humankind, I ask no more. Simply give me your hand." From all these things, I've come to the opinion that the art of great leadership is to have the capacity to be as soft as cotton wool one moment and as hard as nails another, and the wisdom to discern which is required when. Having said what a spirit-led ambition may offer that is good for the church, we have all witnessed times when ambition has been of the selfish kind, of which James warns us, and which the disciples had presumably been exhibiting on the road. We all know of parishes that have been ruined by preening, self-important pastors who are fired by their ambition to get to the top, using appointments and people as mere stepping stones to high ecclesiastical office. There are still too many instances where clergy talk as if you've only made it once you've become a bishop, or who bully their parish councils as if they had been appointed Lord of the Manor rather than leader of the servants of God. On the other hand, many of us will no doubt have come across pastors who believe being nice to everyone rates above all else. The harm such vacuous forms of leadership inflict upon the church is more gradual than the egotistical bullying type, but over time things drift and stagnate, and the leadership vacuum is filled by the local with the strongest personality. But unlike a bullying pastor who will eventually move on, a bullying layperson can often take hold of a parish and stay put. In such situations, you find the tragic truth that those keeping the church alive are at the same time also keeping it empty. I could give examples. Perhaps the old Greek story of Daedalus and Icarus offers us some wise counsel concerning ambition. Daedalus and his son Icarus were imprisoned in the labyrinth as punishment for allowing a prisoner, Theseus, to escape. However, Daedalus found a way to escape by collecting birds' feathers and making wings for himself and Icarus. Before they fly to freedom, Daedalus warns Icarus, "Do not fly too low, or the sea spray will soak your wings and make them too heavy to fly. But do not fly too high, or the sun will melt the wax holding the feathers in place, and the wings will melt, and you'll fall into the sea." As we know, Icarus soon forgot his father's advice and rather enjoyed his sense of freedom and power to soar high into the sky. His wings began to melt, and Icarus fell into the sea. The world is living through a crisis of leadership. International tensions continue to ramp up. Economic forces are weighing heavily on families throughout the world. Desperate people are tempted to look for desperate solutions. Much of the West has been asleep at the wheel in recent decades. Complacent and self-satisfied, European and American leaders have assumed their ascendancy unassailable, believing the whole world would simply succumb to the lure of political freedom and liberalism. The bright stars of Tony Blair and Barack Obama sparked impressively as they rose to power, but soon fizzled out in disappointment after bringing no substantial change. Too many European leaders have been vacuous technocrats, failing to get to grips with the issues that spoil the lives of ordinary citizens, until they were shocked into paying attention by the rise of populist parties. The whole European continent, with a significant proportion of American leading the way, has drifted into coercive groupthink, assuming there could be no other view but theirs on matters of globalization or transgenderism or climate concerns or mass migration. Too many politicians have lost touch with their electorates or actively disdain them. Whilst the West has been largely let down by weak leadership, lacking direction or critical thinking, leaving the door wide open for populism and extremism to enter the fray, the autocracies of the world have doubled down on their personality cults and social controls, until they too have found that no one wants to have any babies anymore in their societies. Why bring a baby into this world if the future looks so bleak? Both the West and the autocratic world have reasons to yearn for better leadership. That same sense of yearning covers most of the globe. What can we say, for example, of the quality of leadership displayed on the African continent, apart from poor Africa? Poor Africa indeed. dare we suggest that those aspiring to leadership would do well to consider the example of Jesus? Perhaps we could recommend that they baptize their ambition with the spirit of humility, because though Jesus Christ was the equal of God, he did not consider it something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. Philippians 2, verses 6 and 7. As James advises church leaders of the day, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. On that day, as they walked through Galilee, when his disciples argued about who should be the greatest in the new kingdom, they still had a lot to learn about holy ambition as opposed to selfish ambition. Subsequent events tell us that despite this unpromising start, the disciples did eventually learn the lesson and followed their master to the cross, into exile, into prisoners' chains. But they changed the world on the way. Amen.